Biafra Civil War, largely from female perspectives. In my engagement with these two texts, as I said, I discovered for the first time the, human beings called child soldier. However, the representations in these two texts are of limited kind. So I began to look into it, and then I discovered that actually it's a huge thing, which I have not come to until then. So I began to explore, and that was how I got to my second, inspiration. I discovered that there is a solid, strong, Western informed discourse around children and warfare on the African continent. But what is interesting for me in that discourse is its unbelievable distortions. If you're looking for a source of disinformation, of half-truths, of what Adichie herself would call a single story, it's in that discourse. The discourse, of course, fashioned by human rights and humanitarian organizations again, I want to use that lazy phrase, in the West. So those are the, two sources. And then I looked more seriously into that discourse, and I found quite a number of disturbing things. And here is the other thing to it. It's not just that they inform how people understand the phenomenon of child soldiering on the continent. It is also that they are quite influential in the way in which even writers who are interested in recreating the phenomenon, are doing it. So they are a very big influence. And some of the texts that I looked at, I mean, again, to clarify, my work is, it's not a field work, it's not any of those, it's, analysis of the recreations of children and warfare in African spaces. So I found out that some of these texts were heavily influenced by the human right and humanitarian discourse on children and, of course, conflict in Africa. And there are, I mean, maybe when we get to the discussion more properly, I mean, I can flesh out some of these core points of, these unbelievable, incredible distortions that I'm talking about. But let me just make one point. Please, Toby, I'm not keeping tab of time, but you can let me know
Yeah, don't
once
worry.
that.
We'll let you know when.
All right, good.
Want you to wrap.
So, I want to let me just, be able to say one or two things quickly. And so I decide to look at even the criticism of, that exists on this body of works. And it's the same thing that I found out, that those criticisms were themselves also pandering to the conclusions in the discourse. And so let's begin to look at, so that I stop talking in abstract, what are the elements of this discourse? Number one, the framing and understanding of childhood in itself. The notion of childhood that is centered in the discourse is one that is heavily oriented towards Western understanding of childhood, one in which biology and chronological age are the centerpieces. And that if you are talking about a child, the discourse concludes that childhood is universal. So that the only way you understand the human entity called child is through biology, and it is through chronological age. Any other means, no. And that presents its own problem, especially for me as a post-colonial scholar. I mean, such centering or understanding of childhood is problematic, because it very clearly excludes other ways by which peoples, and I use that advisedly, in every other place, determine who their young ones are. And so you find a situation where if you go back as far as 1989, there was this instrument that was called the Convention on the Right of the Child. When that document raises the question about who is a child, it answers it does. Anyone below 18. So the straight 18, is what is established in that instrument, that document, as the understanding of the child. And in 1997, when the humanitarian organizations concerned with children and warfare met in South Africa to deliberate on the problem of instrumentalizing children as, soldiers, they were looking for what name, to call this category of people. Keep in mind that historically, warfare, or if you like, conflict, always included children. For example, if you go back to the Crusades, if you go back to the First and Second World Wars, if you go back to the American War of Independence, if you go to the various wars of the wars prosecuted against colonization and even those in those theaters of war. But then what you find is that when these human rights organizations were, which in another intervention I have referred to as BINGOs, big international non-governmental governmental organizations, when they met in 1997, in South Africa, and they were deliberating on how to understand this phenomenon, how to categorize these people and all that, they went back conveniently to the CRC, that's Convention on the Right of the Child, and concluded similarly that a child soldier is anyone under 18, that is XYZ and whatnot. Again, in that sense. So 10 years later, 2007, they will meet France, Paris, and they will double down, on this quite faulty, understanding of what it means to be a child, or one, of course, in conflict situation. That's the first problem there. The second problem has to do with the coupling together of even that phrase, child and warfare. Because for these organizations, children and warfare are incompatible. And this is challenged, this position is challenged by historical facts. There is no such word where children had been completely removed from warfare. So when they then begin to talk about this, they begin to talk about this as though the notion of children and warfare is very new, and it is an African thing particularly, right, in that sense. So there is that problem with it. There is also that. I also want to talk about another thing. I'm just going different, but let me just make this other point because I have 1 minute. I mean, I can flesh things out later. And this is very crucial. When then they want to talk about how to demobilize in their demobilization program, they argue that the loss of innocence in children of war is not something that happened in another space. It happened as a result of enlistment in armed group. And this is a position that I challenge very seriously because it has implication for how we understand socio-political and economic realities in most African spaces. For example, I argue most of, if you look at Sierra Leone, Congo, even Nigeria during the Biafran Civil War, and if you look at Liberia, I mean, these are spaces that I focus on in terms of representations. You find out that prior to the enlistment of most of these so-called children in warfare, peacetime was itself unlike warfare or wartime. So that in my own case, as I argue in the chapter 3 of the work, before these kids were enlisted, deprivations of various kinds, hunger, food, and the basics things of life had converged to rob them of their childhood innocence. Whatever is not finished off in terms of, or whatever is left of that innocence is what is finished off when they enlist in armed group. And what does that imply, or what does that mean for rehabilitation? It means that if you continue to argue that it is within harm group that they suffer the loss of innocence, and so the only way to regain whatever is to bring them back to normal society, that's a big mistake, because if the conditions that necessitated their instrumentalization as soldiers have not been addressed and you are rehabilitating them, you're wasting your time. The cycle will continue. And that's the problem. And it's not, therefore, a surprise that most of the African, former African child soldiers that have been demobilized, most of them don't exist on the continent. They have been taken out, which indicate that rehabilitation may begin somewhere on the continent, but for it to be meaningful, they have to be flown out to other spaces, in that regard. So there is that problem. I mean, I can talk about other things. So for me, what I do here is to challenge the representations of children of war on the African continent as innocent victims, as blameless victims, and of course as people without agency. I mean, I agree with wisdom. We credit children too very poorly, with agency. And go on the streets and ask anybody. See, this is and I will say, make this last point and keep quiet, Toby. Go on the street anywhere and ask anybody, do you know who a child is? People will declaim with authority that they do. Yet, as research and reality have shown, children are not easily analytically graspable. They are not easily understandable, no matter how you pretend to want to figure it, especially children in context of war and atrocity situations. And contrary to popular opinion that precarious conditions and atrocity situations immobilize children, that's not the case. When children face problems, they don't sit on their hands. They act. They exercise agency. They seek ways in their own capacity to manage the situation. And as such, it becomes questionable to refer to children young persons, and this is one of the things in the book. I use the word children quite very carefully, because if childhood connotes innocence and lack of adult experience, how then do you refer to those who have raped, who have stolen, who have committed all kinds of atrocities as children? So that begs the question. And so an appropriate way to begin to look at these folks is to define them based on experience as opposed to age, or biology in this instance. And that's where the problem of child soldier, the phrase child soldier, is problematic, because it also tells us children and innocence, warfare, are incompatible. That's what they want to achieve, but reality speaks otherwise. I'll keep quiet here. We can talk.
Thank you so much for that explicit breakdown. Now, I want us to kind of segue to a different scenario. That's a peacetime scenario. Titi, your book paints the picture of the Nigerian dream, if there's anything like that. Because, here in the US, there's what they call the American dream. You have a family of two, you're doing good, you have a house of your own, you have 2 cars, you get a good job, your pay is fat. Yours is a little bit like that, but in the Nigerian context, with the spaghetti and the other kinds of food that we eat. And now, this child is very curious about what are the heroes around them and how can they grasp life lessons, life truths from those people. And you simplify these heroes, you kind of deconstructed them, which is very, very impressive. I'm still trying to understand the personality of Funmilayo Ransome Kuti or Martin Luther King, and the way you presented them in that book is quite interesting. So I want you to tell us, What inspired this book? I see that you co-authored it with your daughter, which is a very interesting collaboration, right? I wish I can get my daughter to actually tell me what she wants to
Oh,
work. So tell us, what's the inspiration behind this project and what is it getting at the core of it?
okay, thank you very much, Toby. Good. Well, it's evening here, so I'll say good evening, everyone. Thank you once again, GRC, for having me. You're always having me here, and that forces me to sound very academic. Well, I like it. Good evening to Dr. Adeshola. I'm so excited to see you. And of course, Madam Edem. Hello, everyone. So, yes, what inspired this book is so special to me. I'm going to go all the way back, first of all, to start from what wisdom said about history. I think that we need to start rethinking the whole idea of history. So, even if it's not taught as a subject in school, I think that telling stories, especially to children, can have such a long lasting impact. So for me, I think I was about 9 or even younger, I was in primary school when I heard about the story that, I mean, inspired this observation that we're having today, which is the International Day of the African Child. They told us the story. They just gathered us in a room, different children from different schools, and they were telling us the story about what happened in Soweto and all of that. So I have that picture in my head to date. So I believe that the power of storytelling is so important to communicate history to children. So now back to what inspired this book. So of course, even though we're in Africa, where we have such high Western influence, and that reflects in what our children watch, the kind of cartoons they watch. And so I found out that my daughter, who just turned 5 years old, was very obsessed with superheroes. She knew all the superheroes. She would talk about Batman, she would talk about Spider-Man. She wanted to do all the things, all the superficial things that these superhero characters were doing. So I had to let her know that you are not Spider-Man. You are not a superhero, in that sense. You are a human being. So I began to think about a way to communicate that to her because, she seems to have been so engrossed and, in that life, in that world. And I wanted to have the last word. I wanted to have such an influence. So I started to think about what I could do. And of course, we read stories. We go to the bookstore, we buy books, we read, I mean, different kind of stories. Maybe when she's going to bed or just randomly. So I began to think about, okay, I thought that this would be a perfect channel for me to communicate the whole idea of heroism to her. So I began to think, and so I thought, okay, how about real life heroes? I mean, there are heroes around us everywhere that we hardly even talk about. So I started to tell her about certain people who have done certain things, and I was very conscious to ensure that these people were of African descent, the people that she could also relate with, because of course, Batman, all those people have Western, undertone. So I wanted her. Always been very Afrocentric. I don't know where I got it from, but I know that I've always been very conscious of, being an African. I've always been a very conscious African person. So I was very particular to select heroes that we could connect with as African people. So I thought about, of course, as a woman leadership advocate, it was natural to look for a woman. So we thought about Fumilayo Ransome Kuti, who is such a matriarch. I started telling her the story about how she fought and spoke up. Of course, just thinking about what Dr. Ademola said now, I was trying to break it down as much as possible to what I thought was a small mind to make her understand what it meant and what she did, to be called a hero. She wasn't flying, she wasn't doing all that thing that Batman was doing, but I call her a hero still. So I was trying to look for how to communicate that to her, little mind. And so I explained to her that, Fumilayo spoke up when the government was not doing the right thing. Fumilayo did this. She fought for the women. She did all of that. And she said to me, she said, Fumilayo is such a powerful woman. I said, yes, that's why she's a hero. Okay. So we took it further. We went to Abeokuta in Ogun State, where the house of Fumilayo Ransome Kuti Fela's mother, his parents, Fela's parents stayed. So she saw everything. She could connect with it. She could relate with that. And so that was easier. It made it easier for me to be able to pass across, the message. So I then thought she's the inspiration behind it. Why doesn't she just co-author? So that's why co-authored with her. And it was also important for me to also awaken her agency as a young lady living in the global south. So I wanted her to know that she could have a voice too. She could co-author. It's not, authoring or doing big things is not for grown-ups, because there's the vocabulary she uses, is it for grown-ups? And I'm like, yes, it's for grown-ups. Certain things are for grown-ups. But then I wanted her to know that exercising agency is not for grown-ups. And so I made her co-author. So we went through the manuscript together. We read it together. She reads as well. So we were able to come up with the heroes that we came up with. And I can say that that also empowered her certain way and made her feel like she could do these things too that heroes do. And now she understands that heroes are not people who are far away. Heroes are not people that we watch on, only people that we watch on TV. There are people around us. There are people that have done, brave things and kind things, which is very important. Because if you look at those superhero characters, truly, they're portrayed in a way that they're rescuing people. Batman is going somewhere to rescue on a rescue mission. There's Chicken Squad who are keeping the night watch for other people. So what they're doing is heroic. But then to ensure that she also understands, and all other African children, not just her, it was just urban by extension other African children, to understand that they too can be heroes. And that was what informed the book. And so far, it's received a lot of positive feedback. I didn't even intend for it to be, I just wanted to give her something to look up to, or something to hold on to as she was turning 5. I knew that it was important. It was such a milestone. But like I said, I also wanted her to be able to, have her own voice. And I said voice because, apologies to the parents. Many of us, as African children, I think there was something about your voice just being silenced without, unconsciously by our parents. Maybe you're in a public space, or there's a conversation going on. You dare not talk. Even when you try to say something, they're shutting you down immediately. Or when you get home, you're going to be severely punished. Why are you talking while elders are talking? Why are you speaking while elders are speaking? It wasn't really something that was welcome. And God help you if you are the last child. You're mute, you're forever mute. You're never going to have a say in family conversations or decision making. It's always going to be the Olori Ebi if you're Yoruba, So they are the ones that take all the decisions, and you just wake up one day and they've packed you, they've changed your whole destiny, and you didn't even have a say in that. So it was also important for me to ensure that we begin to have, give the African child a voice. I think that if the African child has a voice, or had a voice, some of the things that we've been dealing with, sadly, would be avoided. So we have children who have been abused, who have been, bullied. They can't even speak up. They can't tell their parents because they've never been allowed to use their voice. They don't know how to express themselves. So that was also very important to me. It's so funny that you pray, even for families who pray in the spiritual settings. They ask you to, even when they want to just humor you a bit, they tell you, oh, can you pray for us? After you have prayed, your mother will now pray over the prayer, because that prayer is not potent enough. God did not hear you because you're a child. And you begin to wonder, why did you ask me to pray if you were going to still pray over the prayer? Those are subtle ways that show that we don't really believe in the African child. So for me, it was also important. And so throughout the book, you will see that the voice of the child echoed. It didn't echo, it spoke. It was loud enough. It wasn't echoing. It was very loud. I wanted her to have conversations, especially with her father. Now, we always also, when we think about, the family, the home, we always just, ascribe that expect some expectations naturally to women, when it comes to nurture and the domestic activities. So I was also intentional to ensure that the man's voice, was heard. It was her father who, had that conversation with her about heroes while taking her to school, preparing her for school. So the mother was even quite silent until, the end of the book. And it was deliberate to show that fatherhood, fathers are very critical also in the family system, in the family setting. It's not just about, providing economic support to the family. It's also about giving that emotional support. So we see the protagonist, Finny, who was free enough to have conversations with her father. They were discussing, just like friends. Her father would laugh at the things she says, and she even called her father a favorite person. And that one is even real because my daughter says her father is her favorite person, and I mean, I don't care. But just to show that fatherhood is also very important. Also in the spirit of Father's Day, which was yesterday, I think that fathers are very critical. And even if you don't are not a father biologically, I think it's important that when life presents you with an opportunity to step in as a father, you need to take it. You need to take it. I think there's so many silent fathers, and that's why, certain things in society are the way they are. And now that being said, I also wanted to talk about, when Toby talked about the food, the spaghetti and all that, I put that there to show that yes, you could be Afrocentric, you could be, rooted, but also conversant with, global trends. So depicted that on purpose. But when you go to the fashion, you will see that I was talking about the Iro and the Buba, which is common with, the Yoruba people of the Southwest, Nigeria. Also the names, it was also very important to use indigenous names so that the points can be driven. I know that names are very powerful. A lot of people when they have to maybe relocate or do something outside of their locality, it's always a challenge to retain their names. And so I was also particular about the names. So I think basically those are the general factors that informed the book.
All right, thank you so much, Titi. You eat at different nerves, including nerves that I've been struggling to battle with myself with my daughter. I mean, and you're right in saying that the way we are socialized as Africans, sometimes subconsciously or even unconsciously, we silence the voices of our children without us knowing it. And it's important we begin to recognize those issues and, address them frontally. I mean, some of us here are parents, and what we do in our work shouldn't be far removed from what we do at home. And so if we talk about giving African children their agency, or no, we are not giving them, we are acknowledging their agency because they already have it. We ought to also do that. Thank you for raising that very critical point. Now I want to talk about Adam's work, and I'll be yielding the floor to Wisdom soon. This series is one of the first really that I've seen in a cartoonish way. I mean, there've been a lot of leadership books that had to do with text and all of that, but Adam, you made it into a cartoon, or you made it into something children love. And I know you've always been talking about curating African stories in a way that children can understand, because if they can understand issues about leadership, governance, policies, and things like that from a very young age, they would grow into that mold and makes it easy for them to live up to the expectations. You have a series out on different African leaders. Adebayo the Guru, Kanu the Great, Wale the Lionheart, Ngozi the Patriot, Bolanle the Pioneer. My first thought is, what factors or what criteria did you use to select these models? And to what extent did you consider their influence on the lives of the readers? I'll start from them. Then wisdom, maybe wisdom to also add his own questions right now so that you could take it together. So wisdom, I yield my
Okay.
floor to you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, great. Yes. So I had a very fun time reading through, and I remember that when I was reading, one thing that came to mind was, one particular course I'm taking right now. It's called Africa's Leaders, and we are basically learning about Africa's leaders. We are asking questions of whether leaders are made, the general stuff, whether leaders are born or leaders are made, and all of that discussion. And I think reading through the series and the different heroes that were spotlighted, you would get to see context to their story. You get to understand from their background, growing up, the challenges they face, and then you get to understand, oh, how did this, you get to ask questions rather, how did this background, how did it affect their, person and their being altogether? My question basically would be, I think it also doubles down on Dr. Toby's question. It's going to be, what needs or gaps were you responding to with this work? What gaps did you see or recognize? What questions were you answering with this work? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Greetings to everyone. I'm really so excited to be here. Thank you, Toby, for convening this session. I'm excited about the work that you do. I just recently went through your Instagram page and I realized I'm even late to the pack. You have been having a lot of exciting convene meetings, and I saw one of my mentors, Professor Bukari, there. A lot of very reputable, renowned thinkers whose inputs I would always love to listen to, which is another reason why I'm so excited to be here. I'm so glad to be reunited with Dr. Ademola. I think it was prior to COVID. Yes, you were right. We interacted a couple of times at the American Corner, and of course, your insights, your contributions on every kind of topic is always exciting. Always provocative, and definitely very enriching in any discourse. So I'm so glad to see you again. Very happy to see Titi as well, and to see that she has another book, because Titi had a previous one that was the one I was familiar with. So to discover this one is also very exciting. And of course, true to his fashion, he's taken us on a seminal journey already, Dr. Ademola. I was gripped by your earlier contribution. I recently wrote an article. So I belong to a critical discourse group called the Yaba School of Thought. And recently on the platform, I wrote a piece, an opinion piece at the Business Day on the juvenile justice system in Nigeria. And, to your point about, this idea about how we perceive children and the disempowering view we have and lens we take on children. I mean, I pretty much centered that article on what I call the, Nigeria is going through a Persephonic tragedy. I was referencing the Demeter Persephone Greek mythology. And what we're seeing in recent times in Nigeria is that children are becoming increasingly central characters in heinous crimes. We saw the case of the two boys in Abeokuta who killed a woman, beheaded her and boiled her head in a pot. We see the case of the girl in Chrisland who had, sexual intercourse with a group of boys. That the video went viral on the internet. We see, cases coming out of Nasarawa of the secondary school gangs, with heavy gunfire, leading to massive number of deaths. These are children. As you were talking, I also recalled, one of my friends in Cameroon who was so frustrated at the time. He said he has to wait to be 18 to vote in Cameroon, but at the age of 16, his country demands him in the military. He's already ready to go and fight for his country. They require him to enlist in the military by 16, but don't give him the right to make a decision of who will lead him until he's 18. So it's interesting, these paradoxes. But for somebody like me, as you problematize this issue, I'm very concerned, and I would love us to stretch the debate even further on a separate forum, because one of the foundational norms of, child correctional systems and juvenile justice is that the very idea that the child is still developing morally, emotionally, cognitively, and therefore, all efforts in justice must be redemptive. So we're wary of the adultification bias. You're wary of, viewing the child too agentic. You want to see the child as a victim of social conditioning, because then you can come in with mercy and a sense of redemption. But I think it also makes us really reflect cautiously on the points you raise about this idea that all of the evils lie only in wartime, whereas, you know, the conditions, you know, for trauma, the conditions for and what Miriam Abba called in her book, which is very instructive. I remember in So Long a Letter, she said, you know, she said it's basically, you know, almost taboo when we create the conditions, you know, that corrupt a child. We have created, it is as good as murder. So when society is participatory in creating those conditions that, you know, warp a child, that pervert the natural course of a child, then we've all participated in murder. So it's very exciting anyway, to your point. But now to the questions that Toby and Wisdom have put forward to me. So my work, you know, really the journey of this storybook has spanned 12 years. I remember I wanted to do this in 2012, and that was when I first visited Grandma Awe, Mama Awe, and I sat with her and I captured her story, I recorded it, and I wanted to, you know, but I just didn't have the, I don't know, that I wasn't galvanized, you know, I didn't have the necessary, you know, push at that point in time. Certain incidents took place. And I'll start with that, which leads me to your question first, Wisdom. What are the gaps, you know, that necessitated or finally pushed me off, you know, my apathy or my comfort zone to doing this? I remember in 2023, my organization put together a summer program for children. And even the very term summer program, Abby. Anyway, a dry season program for children. Anyways, we put together a summer program for children. And in that, I was responsible for training them in public speaking. So we're facilitating conversations in public speaking. And I said to them, okay, you will go and work on a presentation tomorrow on the late Chief Bolaige, you know. And they were just staring at me blank. So I looked at these children and said, they don't know this person I'm calling, you know, they don't know this fellow, this man. So I said, okay, you know what? This is an opportunity to go and discover one of Nigeria's foremost leaders. And I left it at that, even though everything in me cringed. This is just recent history. People don't even know, you know, late Bolaige. So I remember that evening as they were going home, and I always tell this story. I heard one of them talking to her grandfather. He said, oh, granddaddy, they said we should work on a presentation on one of Nigeria's, you know, former leaders. He said, hey, which one? Any particular leader, or do you get to pick? And I had said, some Bola guy. I almost entered the ground. So by that time, soon their voices began to disappear. Me, I thought, okay, they had gone out of earshot. Then I just heard the grandfather gasp. Young lady, is it late Chief Bolaige that you are referring to as some Bola guy? My heart now went back into regular rhythm because I realized, okay, I'm not the only one seeing what is happening here. It was at that point I just told myself, oh girl, it's past time o'clock to put these stories out there because I can't blame her. Through all our institutions, educational, cultural, whether she visits her grandfather this same grandfather that was gasping. How come he has never in any of his stories? It turned out he was even an old boy of Government College Ibadan, you know. So, I mean, how come the late Saj had never featured in any of his interactions with his grand? So whether it's from storytelling and all that is intrinsic to us, we're not transferring, right? So I said to myself, go and put together this collection. Many other things surrounding, you know, situations also propelled or, you know, served as a catalyst, a necessary catalyst for this book. We're living in times, you know, where I grew up in cultures within a culture of merit. Maybe it's because I grew up in the University of Ibadan, and I assumed that was a general culture. But that's how I grew up. In fact, I tell people, I say my role model was Mary Slesso. My role model was the founder of, you know, the Red Cross. Those were the images. My role models were the Mama Awares. Those were the people that were constantly placed before us as mirrors to, you know, reflect. It's not this era of, you know, Forbes under 40, 30 under 40, billionaires list, you know, everywhere you turn, who's a billionaire at this? It's a different culture, right? So I grew up in that culture. And as I see increasingly what, you know, the shifts, because anything that affects how we live, how we work, how we love, how we trade, how we connect, affects culture. And technology has suddenly changed the cultural landscape such that fame is the new culture. Fame is the new denominator for success and wealth. Not merit, not what you've contributed, not what mountains you've overcome, Are you famous? That is it. How many followers do you have? That is it. Are you an influencer? That is it. Who knows you? That is it. Was Forbes list you? That is it. And as nice as those things are, they are not the substance that define any civilization. If I take away those things, and I'm not inventing, and I'm not improving, I was watching a documentary recently about how the US, got, was able to trace Osama bin Laden. And I was just reflecting on several things. They used a principle called mensuration to measure the shadow of the individual, to be able to determine, because they couldn't go in there to act on their suspicions, whoever this was a man that they had searched for 9 years plus, right, post 9/11. So my mind was just blown away that principles like this, and then somebody would tell our children school is a scam. These same people telling your children school is a scam, they are going to have their babies abroad. They are still going under the knife of experts abroad to go and have their babies, right? We have to go back to the drawing board. We have to come to terms with, our civilization was interrupted. I agree. But every time we fail to pass on the stories of the legacies of a leader, you see, because a leader is a symbol of a vision that was being implemented in an era. If that leader goes and there's no continuum, whether through, our institutions of governance, political institutions, and through our educational institutions that pass on to certain next generations, ideals and norms and values that guarantee that the same thinking that defined that era is what will be, definitive now, interrupts a civilization. For every child who does not remember late Chief Bola Ige, the implication is that the vision of late Chief Bola Ige is interrupted, cannot continue. And when you think about that in aggregate, when you think about every leader whose story we fail to pass on, we're failing to ensure a continuum. Our civilization continues to experience interruptions, not because some colonialists came in with, guns and gunpowder to come and, take over our lands and our resources, but because we fail to recognize, you understand, what really defines civilizations. It's thinking, it's ideas, right? So I said to myself, put forward these ideas before these children. And also interrupt this self-hatred. The world is increasingly global, and our children are now in global chat rooms. We do ourselves a disservice if we want to go into these chat rooms and mimic the participants that we find in these rooms. We must go in with our authentic selves, and we must learn to love our authentic selves. And that brought me back. As I read these stories, for me, why I've fallen in love with these books is that even for me, it is an enlightenment. It is a new journey in enlightenment. And that's why central to the theme, there are many didactic themes in my book, but central to them is the theme of childhood. As you rightly pointed out, Dr. Ademola, there's so much power in childhood. When I think about all the individuals captured in these stories, they already made announcements to the world about who they were in their childhood. From the Wole Soyinkas, whose precocious nature was clear to the frustration of his father and his mother right from before he was age 4, when he wandered off from one village to another village, following out of curiosity, when he questioned everything told to him, such that adults began to run away from him because there was never an end to his questions. To the Bonali Awes, who sent a telegram to her mother when she just arrived in boarding school and said, I don't need, no mother not needed again. Don't come again to boarding school, right? To the Ngozi Okonjo-Iwealas, who when she was only 9, carried her baby sister on her back because the civil war had already broken out and walked for several miles, close to 300 miles, to find the nearest medical clinic and got her sister the medical attention, just an injection that was needed for the chronic malaria that she was not 18. She was a small girl who was already taking care of her grandmother's compound, by the age of cooking, everything. That's power, right? And so when we borrow and when we imbibe all of these Western definitions of childhood, as you rightly say, we disempower what is already inherent in our children. Children are very assimilative, like Titi mentioned, but they have difficulty interpreting because interpretation comes from context. But there's nothing that goes on around a child that they don't observe and they don't assimilate. We do them a disservice if we don't sit down and dialogue with them and mine the value out of their experiences so that we guide them aright. So all of these were some of the thinkings that just said to me, put out these stories. How did I center on these specific characters? It was difficult because the book must live up to its name, Role Model Series for African Children. However, this was a debut, a maiden edition, right? And I was going to launch first in Nigeria. So I did have to reflect, Nigeria's, I wanted it to be very representative. In fact, if you see the covers, everything was very carefully. I made sure the child is wearing the hijab. In fact, my next edition, I want to make sure that I have a child who symbolizes disability. I want a child on a wheelchair because I want every child to see themselves in that cover, that there's content here that is speaking to you and addresses your needs, your curiosity. So anyway, I said, okay, I need to capture as many icons from recent times because our history books are frozen in time. They've continued to be teaching us about Amina of Zaria and all the, the great Sadauna of, so that is what they've still been teaching us, which is good. But all society is dynamic and culture is dynamic and everything. So which means that since that time, we've been producing more heroes and icons. Why don't they find their way into our books, into our educational curriculum? Because we've politicized curriculum. Because after the military dictators left, and they decreed curriculums, they brought curriculums into existence through decrees, through debate and deliberation. We've not been able to fashion our curriculums that best reflect and guide our children because then it's to come into, is Igbo, why should this one be Hausa? And so on the basis of that argument, we would then throw away the baby with the bathwater. So I said, okay, me, I don't have that limitation. I can traverse the landscape and the horizon and find the most recent of them because if I can speak to the most recent ones that the child has heard, it will pique their curiosity. They will, at least it won't be something far-fetched, So I decided to center my stories around modern and still living icons. Then the story became, okay, so who? I knew that I would focus on Nigeria first. I decided to start off from the pace-setter states. Now, if you look closely, all of these 5 characters have common ties with Ibadan. Ibadan is still the center of innovation and the center of, the origin of firsts in the nation. It hasn't stopped. I discovered in this journey of writing that even, apart from Mama Awe that we all know because her entire career, was advanced in the University of Ibadan, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala began her secondary education in St. Anne's, Molete, Ibadan. It was in the course of this book I discovered, before she even moved on to ISI, before she then went back to the East as a result of the Civil War, she started here. Adebayo Ogunlesi, I didn't even know, went to Abadina Primary School. Abadina Primary School that we've demonized today as, spaces that only produce rejects. Imagine the child from Abadina Primary School reading this. Is it not going to be a complete transformation in their mind? That if my school produced that, then what is stopping me? Kanu Wanko, who I thought was the outlier, his wife Amara was raised in Ibadan, attended All Saints Church, up till she got married. So all of these individuals, Professor Wale Soyinka's common ties to Ibadan need no, introductions. Just go and read, the Ibadan, all his works, all his works bear testament to, the days of Ibadan. So I decided to focus, on the Center for Beginnings and Many Firsts. And so I picked these characters. Beyond their, common ties to Ibadan, all of these people present a definition of success that I want to advance in the Nigerian lexicon and thinking today. That success is not complete when it is only personal. I don't care how much wealth you've amassed. I don't care how many patents you've, invented. I don't care how many, how much profit your wonderful, company is, recording in gross profit. If there is no evidence of national contribution, the tripod of success is not complete. Success is not complete if it is narrowed only to personal wealth. And that's what we're saying. So that's the narrative I'm fighting head on. So I always tell people that, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's statement in his book, Decolonizing the Mind, is one of my guiding principles. That he said children's literature is the first battlefield for the imagination of the human mind. So that's what I'm doing. For me, I tell people my books, even though it's for children, are an instrument of warfare. I want to recapture minds. I want to tackle a culture that is fast redirecting and refocusing our children away from national development. No nation can grow on the thinkings that we have put forward as the dominant thoughts in society today. Self, personal success, and we are in a hyper-personalized order. The era of social media is the era of hyper-personalization, such that if I have achieved billions, then I am successful. But if those billions do not, have not been used as an instrument for national contribution, whether it's in your community, whatever sphere you want to define it, then your success is not complete. So that's what I'm pushing and promoting through these books. I think that I've answered all three questions, and so I'll pause now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And again, you gave us a reason to reflect on how our context, our backgrounds shape the kind of stories we tell. And I'd like to ask Dr. Demola now, because all of us here are interested in literature at some point, whether it's children literature, whether it's adult literature, fiction, non-fiction generally gets its attention sometimes when we talk about works of those popular authors that you mentioned, but not so much children literature. And I think part of the struggle is scholars or even creatives trying to grapple with how to narrate African children. I mean, we see them, we're children ourselves. Some of us still identify as children because you never grow old, especially when you have kids. But how do we tell their stories in a way that doesn't sideline them, but also kind of teaches them what they need to know? So the question really is, what narrative techniques or methods do you find most effective in bringing these experiences, whether it's of children, soldiers, of other people who were not in war situation? How can their stories be told for a diverse audience? So this is the methodology part of the session.
Yeah, thank you again for the question. And I must note clearly how enriched my understanding have been again, listening to Titi and Eden. So thank you so much for those insights. So when I did this research, one of the things that kept recurring is we do a lot on behalf of children without even finding out what do they want. It's just natural, or rather, on the whims. Adults just think they know what is best, for children. Or as they put it in again, another instrument from the UNESCO, the best interest of the child. That it's something that adults exclusively, know. But that's not true. And it's the reason why we're having, some of these issues. Because we are not centering them. Even in research that have, research efforts that are aimed towards understanding children voices and center. The good news is that that is changing, especially in the field of childhood studies. Some researchers are now insisting that it makes no sense to shave a person's hair in the absence of their head, in that way. So that if you want to understand children, whatever it is you're investigating, it's important to center, their voices. It's important to, and this is some very interesting thing that the teachers were talking about, co-authoring with your daughter. And for me, it's not even the outcome that is the big deal, it's the process. Because that's where, this whole thing is. So I would argue quite strongly about, an active involvement of children in the, I'm going to do a presentation on a book panel later this week at the LSA conference. I'm looking at this particular book about, the digital life worlds of children and all that. So when I was reading that book and, trying to speak to it in my own way, my mind was, taken back to some decades ago when Robert Coles, that's the name of this, child psychologist, asked the question, do children have political life? And that research turned out in a book, and which he titled "The Political Life of Children." And the argument there is that children have political life, and he then put it quite very meaningfully when she talked about the kids are quite perceptive. They may not have the resources of language yet to articulate what they perceive quite strongly. But if we meet them where they are and try to make sense of what they have perceived, they make sense. And which is why, again, for back to that question, Toby, we also need to stop viewing childhood as a disability. Because oftentimes people think about children as beings in the process of becoming, rather than as humans already there. So I think that it doesn't serve well to think about children in that sense. I'll make this one point. I have joined you to use the word children a lot. Although my preference would be, young people. In different discourses, and particularly literature on, childhood studies, there's a segment that interchangeably use these terms, child, young adult, and whatever, or young people. But I think for my own project, I seriously worry about what that word is doing. It's highly inadequate to refer to young people caught in the throes of war, particularly whether as soldiers or as those affected by it. Then the reference you made to the case of the experience of Okonjo-Iweala, for me, is very powerful. And that's one of the things that I center in my own work as well, especially in the sense in which some writers have, depicted this reality. And that is that in context of atrocities, precarious conditions, children don't remain children as we understand them. They act, they exercise agency. And the problem with agency is that people think it must be heart-shaking or it must be some revolutionary, thing. No, it doesn't have to be. There could be what is, as I, maintained in my book, there's what is tactical agency, so which is the agency that allows you to survive from day to day, So this is not a strategic one, which you can rupture things, and reorder conditions. But the tactical agency, which is prominent, mostly in context of, war and what have you, children exercise, or these so-called children exercise this in such that they do things that adults will still spend time thinking whether that is the path to beat, So they just, and they are daring, not, again, sometimes our adults might want to read that as carelessness, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. Our children understand that philosophy very well. So for me, thinking about these folks as children is something that I found quite, unhelpful if we understand that adulthood is experience. And so when these folks then operate in adult domains, how then do we conveniently still want to refer to them as children? It's a very critical, point there. And this is what it does if we insist that we must look at them as children. It is that it undercuts their abilities. For example, children, these folks in armed group who have led platoons, who have provided leadership, who have, envisioned how they can manage certain situations. When you're now demobilizing them and you want to insist that they are children, you are ignoring the capacities they have built. in that context. So there is not much question around how do we use what they have cultivated in terms of capacities, to ensure that they have a good rehabilitation. They don't think about that. And I give you this story. So one of the folks who had written their own memoir, uh, this is a Sierra Leonean guy, Ishmael Bear, a long way gone. So, I mean, that's the it's a celebrity former child soldier. The West made him so. One day, he went to the United Nations Children Parliament, and he was going to be a speaker there. Just as he issued forth into the room, he said to the audience, "Don't be afraid of me. I'm no longer a soldier. I am now a child." So, and look, you would think that's some careless thing or it's just a joke, but until you look at the discourse, the humanitarian discourse of child surgery, they insist that lost childhood is recoverable, and how they do that. So I guess in sum, the point I'm making is that concepts are quite very important on the one hand. The concept we use to describe whatever phenomena we're engaging with will determine to what degree we understand it. Insisting that those are young persons who have been at war are children would make us ignore some of the capacities they have built. And that's not helpful for rehabilitation. Secondly, is the fact that children are critical in any programs we're designing, in any context, and beginning from the home context. This is very, very important, before you even go to the larger, context. So that's what I will be looking at when I look at, how to uh, just in response to that question that you're
All right.
asking.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ademola. We'll go on a short break right now. One of the things I like teaching my daughter is to take regular screen breaks so she doesn't get addicted to screen. I don't know how you do it, but keeping a child off screen for off over an hour could be something. But I also try to incorporate that in my regular work life. So we just want people to stretch, go take water, or use the restroom or whatever. Just take some 3 minutes off screen so we can reflect on some of these conversations. And when we come back, my colleague will take over. John Daniel is one of the members of the GRC team that curates this kind of discussions for policy purposes. So John will take over hosting this event, and Wisdom, you're happy to also intervene from your own work and also from your experience from time to time. Thank you. So John, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, sir, and thank you, everyone. Good evening from this part of the world, like she said earlier. So I think we'll go on the 3 minutes break, and we'll be back to continue and dig deeper into the subject. All right, so we'll go on the break now. Thank you. All right, well, welcome and welcome from the 3 minutes break, and would like us to proceed. It is a great opportunity to sit with authors and reviewers this evening. All right. So I have some questions. So before I ask them, I would like to reiterate the purpose of the GRC in convening meetings like this. I remember I heard Dr. Oluwato Biloba talk about it, that just like the popular song says, we will shift the culture. These are culture shifting conversations and ideas that we're having here this evening. And I've been listening in to them and would like us to proceed in them. I remember hearing about how Kano's wife was one of the persons who grew from this same Ibadan. Funny enough, I'm actually making this call from Ibadan. So I'm happy that I'm hearing about so if they can succeed from Ibadan, you know that feeling, just like you said, not just for a child. And before I ask the questions, there is always a child in every man or woman. There is still that child that is excited about these things. And thank you so much, man, for that one. It was a strong one. It was a strong one that I can hold on to. Dr. Ademola, I would like to ask a follow-up question, sir. What ways do you see storytelling, whether written or visual, as a tool for empowering African children and shaping public perceptions? And I would give a context to this. Yesterday, I didn't even know I would be having the opportunity to anchor this. I was with teenagers. They're already teenagers, about 17, and the girl told us that as early as primary two, she was already writing stories. And she would read a story and rewrite the same story in her own way. But over time, she got scared and stopped. And I was trying to encourage her to see how such talents can blossom. So I know I tried my best, but I want to hear from experts like you. What ways do you see storytelling, whether written or visual, as a tool for empowering African children and shaping public perception? Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I will just reiterate some of the things that have been said here today, because I think that in referencing Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Idem answered that question. What Ngugi is, decolonizing the mind. And if anybody should know about the power of storytelling, I think it's Ngugi. Particularly if you look at the whole project of slavery, of colonization, of imperialism, and whatnot, they were shaped by stories. Additionally, the understanding of Africa that is entrenched in Western imagination is equally a product of stories told time and again. I'm going to say, I'll use this example. I mean, we know racism exists, you know, uh, in, in the Western law. And so there was my kid one day, came back. Before the kid even came back from school, the principal had called me and said, "Oh, XYZ happened today. Somebody said so to your child. We just want to give you, you know, a heads up so that you know before the child gets home." That's not my problem. My problem was when, in the same breath, the principal then said, "Oh, you know, the child who was involved in this is just a child."
Is it my network or it's from his end? I think it's from his end. I can still feel you. Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had warned earlier that he might, be affected by the untrustworthy internet. So, but promise.
Untrustworthy indeed. I would say we proceed so as to save time. And by the time he's back, would allow his flow of thought from where he stopped. Okay. Titi Kushima, ma'am, is she still on the call? Yes, she is. I would like to have
Yes,
one
I
more
am here.
few seconds before we proceed. How can literature and media help reshape both local and global conversations about African childhood? The reason why we are asking almost the same question from different perspective and specialization is that the end game for the GRC is we'll be able to have policy briefs, community sensitization, proposals, and relatable issues to be able to raise them and present them to policymakers. So we're not just asking for asking sake, can we value your time enough to have you on this call? So how can literature and media help reshape both local and global conversations about African childhood?
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
I think that's so powerful when you talked about the media, especially the new media, social media, and all that we have in this, 21st century. When Madam Eden was talking about it earlier, it made me very much more reflective because the truth is, we are already living that reality, okay? I shared a post with a friend on Instagram just yesterday about some topic that made the headline on Punch newspaper, and I was like, how is this a headline? How is this a conversation to be having on, a newspaper headline? And what she told me was, can you chase clouds? Like, it was obvious that even the traditional media are beginning to pander, and, succumb to what's popular. They know what's going to get the comments high. They know what's going to get the engagement. So when you post, for instance, what happened in Benue, nobody's going to talk about it, even though these are issues that are staring us in the face. Nobody cares. But when you post somebody's relationship broke or something, everybody wants to talk about it. Or one celebrity just bought, a new Range Rover or something. The engagement is high. So I'm actually more worried, that even when we know the reality, we know what should be done, we know the ideal, it's unfortunate that, some of us are beginning to see, okay, what can we do? How can we connect, with the current generation to see that, okay, this is what we're supposed to be doing, but we know that these methods are no longer working. So if you want to connect with this generation. I was smiling when Madam Eden was talking about the role model. I also read Dora Queenly's memoir that her daughter Chidogo wrote, and I was in tears. I just wondered how at such a young age, I wasn't surprised at the kind of achievement she was able to record, because I knew that from childhood she was prepared for that life. I wasn't surprised. But what's interesting is that for a regular child growing up now, that's torture. I mean, these children just want soft life. They don't want any stress. So how do you then say, you're caught in between that place where you know the ideal, you know that it's not about success, telling the stories of successful people. It's not just about the glam and what you see on Instagram and the edited posts. Nobody sees the background work that is being done. Nobody sees the hours that the person has put in. Everybody just sees the success, and that's what the media is pushing. The media will not tell you all the things that the person had to go through. Like, we're breaking it down now in the hero story that we're telling. Even Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, I had to explain, to my daughter that this is what she had to go through to be able to speak. This is what she had to go through to be able to defend the people. And even I began to think that to be a hero is not easy. And it's not easy to tell that story to a generation that's not even willing to, hear it. So I think that the media has such a powerful tool, such a powerful tool, but then there's a responsibility on the media to ensure that we redirect, the storytelling so that as much as we're trying to connect with, the trend and what's going on, and we know that if we post this particular thing is going to trend, how about we also, pushing narratives to promote values such as hard work, to promote values such as diligence, to promote values such as resilience and consistency. I just think those are the things that, I'm like a bridge between the Gen Z, and the millennials. So I kind of see things from both angles. And I noticed that while it's important for us to, use the media to drive conversations around how we can sustain the society, how we can build a formidable society that will be able to, that we can be sure that, posterity can thank us for, and we can be sure that the succession is safe. Because right now, I don't even know what's going to happen to the coming generation that we're looking at because of the kind of things that we're seeing. We're not sure of, in terms of succession, even in leadership, we look at the kind of, the crop of leaders that we're raising, that we have now. It's just, it's a product of what we have been churning out. A politician, comes and he just gives money, sprays money. Even the process of, getting into power is so expensive. So people are just focused on the money, just get the money, just get the money. So it's even as much as you understand that success is beyond personal gains, sometimes you are caught in between that point of your reality and what should be the ideal. So I think media, should play that powerful tool by balancing what's put out there, because of course you cannot control 100%, especially with private media. You cannot control, what they should put out 100. You cannot outrightly, yes, even though government should have, regulatory measures, but I also think that it's important for the media to, I mean, have that consciousness that even though we're pushing out content that would connect with this generation, we're also putting out content that would tell our stories, that would make sure that these people are not lost, in the whole frenzy of, success. And I also wanted to mention one thing that someone said about um whether if you had to choose between having a good name and having, money. There's a Yoruba adage that says, let me say it in English and I'll say it in Yoruba, that if you are going to the house of money and you meet honor on the way, they're supposed to go back because honor is what you really need. That thing about lọ sí ilé owó tó bá bá iyì lọ́nà, I might be wrong with that, the way I'm putting it, but the essence is that if you have honor, if you have a good name, it's enough for you. But in recent times, it looks as though that's not the reality. And in fairness, when you interact with people, when you interact deeply with even people that are respected, and that they've carried on these ideals for so long, you begin to see a shift in their thinking, and they're beginning to think that, I'm not sure this is working anymore because of the harsh realities that they're being faced with. So, in essence, why we keep telling these stories to ensure that we preserve our humanity, we preserve what's important. I think it's also important to look at ways to address this growing, phenomenon. We cannot shy away from the fact that things are really, really changing, things are shifting, and it's either we create a mechanism to, connect the dots, or we keep sitting in our high horses and thinking that we're just going to keep telling stories. We have to look for a way, to connect so that we can be able to, get the right outcome. So I think that, the media has such a critical role to play. And I like the fact that, certain platforms are now dedicated to actually telling stories, to interviewing people, hearing, their story, hearing the things they had to endure, hearing the things they had to go through before, they emerged. So if you see somebody on, Forbes 30 under 30, 40 under 40, you know that it's a lot of hard work. It's not just one viral post and everybody's talking about them. And that's why sometimes when people go viral, just one post, because the media can help you, go viral like that. But what is the essence of the virality? What is the substance behind, that virality? So for some people, going viral can be a positive It can have positive impact and it can also have negative impact. So the media just has that, power, but just like I've been saying, it's important that we also, as stakeholders, as much as we understand, we see the gaps, we see the reality as well, we must begin to think of creative ways to connect the dots, creative ways to ensure that these values that we're trying to push they eventually reach the right audience, and we're able to preserve our society and our future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Media is bridging the gap and for creating platforms. Before I circle back to Ademola Adeshola, you're welcome, sir. I would have
I apologize. I told you I was gonna.
no problem, sir. I would circle back very shortly. Wisdom Ebai, please, would like to take your follow-up questions now to Edem or Sai. Thank you. Then I'll circle back to Ademola.
Yes, thank you very much. So back to Ms. Edem, from your answer earlier, you mentioned that it goes beyond the story that we're telling, and it really stretches into the values, the legacy, and the vision that we pick on the way from these stories. Now I'm going to because I remember reading through the stories. At the end of each story, we have reflections for the people engaging with the book. So what informed the format and tone of the reflections at the end of the stories? And then how do you think they were able to facilitate, or they're able to facilitate the way these children take in the stories and the values that we present to them?
Thank you, Wisdom. I recall when I was a young girl, one of my greatest reads was My Father's Daughter by Mabel Shegun. Not only was it told, through the lens and voice of a young girl, it was the first time I discovered that I could have a chat with myself. I discovered my duality. I discovered that I wasn't just an existing being, but I was a reflective being. So I could separate myself from my experiences and talk back to myself. And it was a very empowering situation. It helped me deal with certain experiences in my life, difficulty through school, challenging myself, encouraging myself when my father died. So that duality of my existence, sort of like, help me navigate life and continues to help, because as adults, then, we're more conscious of that duality, it gives you, so you're not just an actor in a space, you can step out of yourself, and, do that. So going forward, I realized that I wasn't the only person experiencing that. It's the normal human experience, right? And recognizing that early for children is one of the greatest forms of respect. Any written work, really, as they say, is one individual may author it, but for every reader who reads that work, it's been reauthored. So I may put out a work, and if 1,000 people read it, then 1,000 new authors have, defined that work, because 1,000 new interpretations, 1,000 new conversations have been birthed. So I needed to give space for that, dialogue. That dialogue not only was a key theme in my book, Centering Childhood. In other words, and one of the things I remember somebody taught me early, one of my mentors taught me, said, as soon as a baby girl is born and survives, and you start hearing her crying, in that, whether it's in the hospital or it's in the, midwife, or it's in the wherever, in the home where she's born, she has the potential, that baby has the potential to become a great-grandmother with 100, grandchildren and great-grandchildren before she leaves this earth. That potential is already innate in her. What is just going to unfold is a journey that leads her there. In whatever environment, that potential is still present. So that's why I visit childhood. In fact, the majority of the chapters in my role model stories are on the earlier parts of their lives, because these children have already been introduced to the latter parts of these individuals through the media, through the news as adults, and they're stock characters as adults. So the children cannot see their own position as children as being reflected in the journey of these individuals. And so a separation occurs. But if I revisit their childhood and represent it to children, then children can then see their own experiences as part of the arc of the journey. This history that later on, blossomed into this great thing began at this point when I too am a child, and this potential was already present. So me too, heroism is innate in me, inherent in me, buried within me. And then we begin to stop this demonization of place. And one of the greatest acts, of disservice we pay to ourselves is, demonizing the village. The African hates the village. The village is a terrible place. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited about the story of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, because look at this great woman who is the first ever African, female director of the World Trade Organization. She wasn't raised in Lagos or Enugu. She was raised in Deep Ugwashuku in Delta State, in her grandmother's compound. It built her. It was her boot camp. It was her training camp. It built all the features that she's using to lead today. So this, and I talk about Kanu Nwankwo's story. He never trained in any fancy green patched, football pitch. He trained on the streets of Owerri, Tetlow streets, where they will use old tires. So this thing that we've done to ourselves, where we hate our experience of limitation. And yet every story we watch in Hollywood taught us, showed us that the climax was never possible without the hero going through the challenge, the fight, unless the story is anticlimactic if the hero has not undergone the struggle with the adversary, right? So we must embrace what is unique to us. It's our experience, and it's building us, and it's preparing us. It's foraging us for the world. But to the specific question about the choice of the dialogue, I decided therefore that, in fact, if you read the different chapters, you would find their voices present. So as the writer, I would ask them a question. As something is happening and I'm reporting this occurred, that occurred. So it's creative nonfiction. It's nonfiction, but I try to be flowery and creative. And I try to go, for everybody who is alive, I try to sit with them because I want to get anecdotes from their childhood. It's those hidden stories that excite the imagination of the child. And then you say something. So even Adebayo Ogunlesi, by the time I talk about the airports, he's the man who is celebrated for owning international airports. I then ask the children, have you visited this airport? Don't worry. Or are you dreaming of visiting it? Okay, here's what, or when you talk about billions, do you know what it means? What, that your math equation that taught you 1 million. So where I'm asking them questions, they're thinking. That's why I needed, therefore, in the reflective exercises, to respect the fact that they have opinions, that this work of literature has, if I was writing to human minds are a living thing. And so a dialogue was occurring for every line that was being read, a dialogue was occurring. That reflective space is the space for that dialogue. And I tried not to impose, because a lot of literature for children has been heavily didactic. You sermonize, you moralize, you tell them this is what it is. So, but I wanted to hear, what were your highlights? So I start just to tease them into the conversation. I start by sharing my own highlights in a very humble way. Oh, this is what stood out for me. Because like I told you, writing this journey was an expose even for me. In fact, I didn't come up with the titles for any of these stories until the end, because it's from the characteristics, the dominant characteristics in the stories of these people, that I was able to determine, this is the best adjective to qualify this individual by, because it's self-definition or definition for such complex individuals is a difficult thing, So I had to find that one thing but it was only at the end of the writing process that I discovered, okay, I would say Bolanle the pioneer, because man, she pioneered throughout, right? Or Ngozi the patriot, because that was some patriotism. To watch unscrupulous oil marketers hold her over 90-year-old mother and threaten to kill her unless she resigned. And she stood firm, saying, no, for God and country. Will all of us pass that litmus test? So I needed to then reflect and say to these children, this is what stood out for me. What about you? And then, because life is a journey of learning, and the books are supposed to be a tool for the growth, the growth of any individual, I'll ask them, since I wrote in a certain language, did you learn any new words in this language? This language is alien to all of us. It's not our mother tongue. So this language helped me to, were there any new words you learned in this, through this book? Because this is the language you all have to trade in, a language we all have to communicate in. So it's supposed to enhance your ability to do that, right? So those were the reasons, those were the things that provoked the kinds of, or the style I adopted. And I also used illustrations, because the child is an imaginative creature. As Dr. Ademola pointed out, they don't yet have the huge resourcery of language in the forms that we by virtue of time and professional usage, have gained. So images are very powerful tools for communicating to children. So I try to also weave in, illustrations, into, and also flowery words. So beyond just images, flowery words, and going back to even our orality, we are flowery people. We weave, and one linear sentence by an American, I can use a whole, 5 paragraphs to say the same thing. That is who we are, and we should embrace it. So I try to use all of those, things also to capture. But basically, these books are a dialogue. And these books, if they are to achieve their aim, are to ignite. Storytelling, in my opinion, are not just ideological tools. They don't only teach you what to believe. They don't only correct distortions about who you are. They are galvanizing tools, the way prayer is supposed to be. The other day, we were all lamenting in Nigeria how a memo leaked that said that the Ministry of Agriculture wanted to pray their way to national food security. And we were all complaining, right? But the complaint is as a result of the fact that, we fail in our partnership with the divine. The divine is always cooperating with us, We must do our part, because they say faith without works is dead. We are heavy on the prayer life. There's nothing wrong with our national prayer life. Storytelling is also innate in us. We are very good with stories. Maybe there's room to write them more, but orality-wise, we've always told stories. But stories are supposed to galvanize action. So the way they galvanize action is that a conversation must ensue, and you must give space for that conversation to happen. Questions must come about at the end of a story. Otherwise, your programming is faulty. And a lot of what happened in the past was that they taught us stories using the rote memorization. We left, again, many aspects of our civilization was interrupted. When we use stories as galvanizing tools, we fought wars, we conquered, empires. And we shipped better tools. We did better. Our tools, our technologies were growing. They told us stories to avoid certain streams, there's certain water, certain diseases. They helped us survive the times. But then this dissonance happened and whatever. But we must come back to using storytelling as a galvanizing tool. And for that to occur, the individual must speak back to the writer, or must have other fora where they can have dialogue. So I'm even hoping that as a result of these stories, there will be, reading sessions where children will talk, parents at home will read, and then they will discuss and they will dialogue. At the end of it, the question is, after all said and done, what will you do? Because we must shift from talk shop. So that's my hope. That's the spirit behind these books, that it will shift us away from talk to doing. We'll have less talkers and more doers amongst our children.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wisdom. Do you have any follow-up questions?
No, thank you very much for the answers.
All right. So let me just quickly circle back to Demola Adeshola, sir. You are taking us on a journey before the network put us in a bus stop. So we don't know if you could. Thank you, sir.
What a way to put it. I appreciate that. Again, I apologize for the interruption. I knew it was inevitable. So, I was talking about you. The question posed to me was about the value of storytelling, and I think when I came, I had Titi talking about that as well. What Idem has shared equally underlying this important point. Again, when I look throughout history, anybody you could point to as somebody of substance, they will tell you stories played critical role in their formations. In this instance, I'm thinking about Einstein, I'm thinking about Achebe, I'm thinking about, in fact, in the essay, The Truth of Fiction, Achebe underscores the importance of storytelling. And he makes a distinction as well between what he calls benevolent stories and malevolent stories. And the latter, of course, was, according to him, what the colonialist used a lot how they frame the understanding of other people. You know, I mean, some boasted so much that they have written a lot about Africa without being in Africa. So, and this is just, of course, as you know, something from the imagination about the other. Adichie also talks about the fact in the famous TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. The point there is also the importance of stories. The stories are important, she argues. You know, stories are quite invaluable, and we must, tell them. The African-American author James Baldwin or Toni Morrison and the rest of those folks also remind us of the importance of storytelling, especially, in the formative years of, young people. We have to, it's the part for broadening the imagination. I think it was said at some point today, whether it was Eden was making that point about whatever you have, if it's not something that it is adding value to others, perhaps nationally or whatever, it doesn't begin to make sense. And the part to setting up young people to contribute, especially as thinkers, and I always like to say this to my students, you will never know how thinking is one of the most difficult things to do until you go to social media. Just pay a little attention. You're going to discover that there's a problem. And this is not something to do with one region of the world. I mean, as somebody who straddles, two spaces, I can tell you it's a human affliction. It's not something that you find in Nigeria or somewhere. In my Canada, in the US, or in fact, the US, which is living the life of the past, it's even worse for this. Especially if you look at how many people even get educated there. I mean, people always don't pay attention to how many Americans are really educated. And I'm not thinking about certification, in this sense. I guess the point I'm making is that if you want people to be creative, if you want people to have critical thinking capacity, stories are part of the means to do that. Because as we have had today, stories involve asking questions. You have to question and debate and think very seriously. But it's also important to note that stories also help us to appreciate the complexity of the human person and the human experience. And stories help us to develop that capacity, for meaningful tolerance. This idea that you can be and not be burdened or bothered by what somebody else is. This is very important. It's true, story. I mean, in some of my classes, I have students who are science students who come, to my literature class. And on the first day, one will joke with them about how their being in that course is purposely to humanize their science, because the science without literature is dangerous. So basically, we cannot overemphasize why stories, are important. And again, it is also through stories that we connect with a past that we are not part of. This is, and I think this is the work that Idem's book is also doing. Anyone who reads the book certainly was not part of the childhood of any of these characters. But then, because that story is being told, you can be part of that. You can go back in that time and glean some gems of wisdom, and insight. It can be useful in this way. So that's something that I want to. And again, in my own research, the discourse that I was talking about itself, I mean, it's also shaped by stories, about how people are. And you understand, and let me make this one more point. One of the ways in which understanding of conflicts in African has been distorted is evident in, and I think Toby would know, there's a lot of, because this is the instrument of political scientists. So you find a situation where they talk about new war and old war. And so the concept of new war is one in which such wars are aimed towards, pillaging, atrocities, sexual violence. The objective is basically to loot and destroy. And then when you ask the question, where then do these wars happen? In other words, these new wars. Oh, they say it's in the global north, the global south. In contrast, they talk about old wars. And then what are the features, or if you like, characteristics of old wars? Oh, they are wars fought to maintain democracy. They are wars prosecuted by patriots. They are wars that are aimed towards, the wellness of the human race and whatnot, all these sweet things. And you will never believe that they're talking about war when they characterize, this like this. So to the question, where do this war, who prosecutes this war? Are they? And then they say it's in the global north, as the US, is Canada, is Britain, is all those, even in Europe, all those people, they are the ones who do all this. This is the story they tell themselves, about what kind of war they are undertaking. Then you're also talking about how Osama bin Laden was killed. I like the story, except that we must not forget that the demonstrated clinical capacity that brought that guy down is also part of the evil that we have to contend with in the world. I mean, you can't make your own enemy and destroy them and tell me that you are saving me. No, you created that enemy. You are dealing with that enemy. I don't say how I want to celebrate, when you are destroying your own enemy, the enemy you created yourself, and you use certain, military precisions and all that. This is also the story of Gaza. It's the story of most of these places, these folks. So I come to, as much as one wants to celebrate the human mind conceived, of the instruments to deal with folks like that, I am also careful to understand that when you and I are not looking, to what end, to what use do they also put, these things. So this is very important in that sense. Overall, I don't know a human world that can survive without stories. I don't know how anyone, can develop a very serious deep reasoning capacity, as well as, again, just as I said I'm also reminded that it was Eden who also talked about the flourish that we center in the entertaining way in which we tell this story. We're not just telling this story, we tell them entertainingly. And what I want to bring out of that is also how the ability to conceive idea and articulate it in readable manner. It's a big problem for our young people. And if you understand that we are creatures of habit, we are what we do again and again, then you realize that when you hear people write, those are young people write and speak and do so quite poorly, it speaks to what they accord attention to. Because this thing is not natural. You have to develop it. You have to feed the mind. You have to. And one of the best ways to do that is to be exposed to different forms of writing, in this sense. So I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, sir. We are part of history through stories. That stood out for me and reminded me about a particular scripture from the Holy Bible, where the psalmist, I realized whenever he talked about the parting of the Red Sea and the stories of the Israelites, he says it as though he was there personally. and that emphasizes the impact of stories. I don't know if we have other questions, question and answers before we close, or you have some closing thoughts from our speakers and reviewers tonight. If you have closing thoughts, this would be a good time to share before we close out for the evening.
So sorry, I mean, just on the joke you just said, or not joke, you referenced the Bible. You said, I go back to the same Bible. Someone, put it and said, fiction began the day Jonah got home and told his wife he had been in the belly of the fish for 3 nights. In that sense. I mean, it's just fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I had to write that down somewhere so that I won't forget.
Well, it's not original to me.
No problem.
It isn't original to me.
I will
Someone
add
said
that
it,
to my
and I just find that I mean that's because you make an important point when people speak about things, and that's what I was talking about. How stories are these spaces that encourage question asking. Somebody tell this lofty story. They share this thing. You just need to listen. And when they are done, you ask. Whether that story will be meaningful or not depends on the nature or whether they can withstand the questions that are coming. And also it's important to note, answering questions is not a big deal. We also know the mind of a person through the questions that they ask. And this is also very important this way. For my own closing thoughts, I mean, I think an important way to do that is to talk about the social relevance of my own work to particularly a space like Nigeria. We talk a lot about the loss of childhood. We talk about the corruption of it or the truncation of it. I mean, happens in different ways. Then the other time you were citing all those supposedly children who did this or did that, whether it's Zamfara, whether in the state, whether in some places. I look beyond such development to track the loss of childhood. We know that hunger is, should be an adult experience, not something associated with kids, right? But you figure out that if you look at the Nigeria of about more than the last decade, it's brought me to a point where I say, it's not even when children are born that they begin to lose their innocence. It's from their mother's wombs. And that might be surprising. And how is it? If a mother who is not feeding well, who doesn't even feed, they just eat whatever they can see. It goes without saying that the child too, the womb is also undergoing an experience of hunger. So right from the womb, these folks begin to know the color of hunger. And if hunger is something largely associated with adulthood, then we see that the involvement of such folks
Thank you, sir.
Also indicated.
Thank you so much, sir. Do we have any
sorry,
sorry.
Let me just wrap up why I was saying that. Yeah, just to wrap up what I was saying is that a country of this kind needs to be more attentive to its young ones. You know a country by the nature of its attention to its young people. I salute what work Titi and Idem are doing, as it is a couple of others who do this kind of work catering to young minds. But I worry a lot about where that goes. It doesn't. So I have a question for you, really. I think that's the best way for me to this kind of project that you guys are taking, public school pupils. do they have access, to these works? Because I think that, I mean, I didn't ask about private schools, but I know if some of those who mind these places will be interested in things like this. The question is, Aberdina and the rest of them that you were talking about, where some of these folks are, do the kids there have access to this book? Whether you guys have been invited by some of these persons to, come interface with these young people. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I respond to that? To Dr. Adimola's question?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it's actually thought-provoking because sometimes when we write these things, we don't think about holistic experiences. We just think about, some set of children. And I like the fact that, we're now looking at representation to ensure that every child can see themselves, in the stories that we're telling. So I think that it's a challenge. I mean, to us who are writing, telling stories to ensure that, these stories get to, the people. If, we go to a school, a public school, I mean, when you live in Nigeria and you see the state of these public schools, your heart will go out to them. And the bigger challenge actually is that, are they even ready to read? Are they in that frame of mind where what they want to hear is you reading to them about heroes, about people who have succeeded? When you have to look at the basic needs that they have, when you are talking about, I mean, some hero, they're looking about at someone on social media who has blown, someone who has done internet fraud and just blown quickly, and you're telling them about stories. So sometimes there's that challenge about, connecting to them, with the story. And that's goes back to the question earlier. I think I need to rephrase that. I was a bit distracted earlier with the question about the media. I mean, having that responsibility. I think right now, the media is responding, from my observation, the media is simply responding to consumption, I mean, the appetite of the people, what the people want to consume, what the people want to hear, what the people want to read about, what the people want to watch. So that puts the challenge on us who are creatives, who are telling stories, to look for creative ways, to connect. And I can give you an example. You go to a secondary school, maybe you go to have a talk. I've done that several times in my line of work and also personally, volunteering. And you go to talk to people, children in public schools, and you're telling them about certain things. You see that there's, a majority of them are not as inspired as you would expect, because their minds are made up about something else. Their minds are made up and they're thinking about, you are just speaking English. You are probably eating. You're not going to hawk when you get back home. You're not going to,
So doesn't that mean that, permit my rudeness, but doesn't that mean that no one philosophizes on empty stomach? Like you can.
yeah, so that's why I'm saying that that's if we accept we want to, just shy away from it and just have, these conversations without going to the root of it. So I'm just saying that of course there's need to, connect with the people, public schools especially, but there are bigger challenges which are staring us in the face, bigger challenges. Even some of them, I remember when I was in, NYSC 7 in Osun State, there were, several instances of, cultism in, secondary school children. They were already engaging in, all sorts of things. So I mean, while it's important, tell the stories, I think, we have to look at accompanying factors that we must, put into this. And that's why I keep saying that we need to look for creative ways. We need to seek creative ways, to, I mean, get to these children. Of course, we will see some outliers, we'll see some minority who will be inspired, of course, because I was watching a video by Vusi Tamba Kweyo, yeah, and he was talking about the fact that your excuses are valid. Whatever it is you're experiencing as an African child or an African person, a black person, or someone who has come from a poor background, they are valid. But you're not going to, you're not going to use that as an excuse not to be successful. But he is just in, the minority. how do you get, other people who don't have that privilege of perspective, to get to that point? I think that's a challenge, for me, even I'm just speaking it out now, to see how we can, when next we are going to schools, when next we're going on tours, even if it's reading tours, to have, connect with these people, we need to also be thinking about the bigger challenges that these people, seem to be facing, from, their family challenges, their economic challenges. Some of them after school, they don't even have the capacity. I've, for instance, gone to a school before, even when we donated books in public schools, even when books were donated, the principal was saying they don't have a library to keep those books. So it's better that you come whenever you want to come, you bring the book with you. So you keep coming and going with the books, because they were not even ready to take responsibility for the children. So those are the bigger challenges, because even they are experiencing, limitations, factors around, socio-economic limitations and all of that. So I think that, particularly as Africans, since we're talking about, the African experience, I think that these are some of the, bigger issues that we need to also, be looking at while we're, telling our stories. Yeah, so I just thought to put that out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'll respond to Dr. Ademola's question, and then I'll also end with my sort of like last, what is the phrase we use? The sound bites, closing remarks, yes.
Closing remarks.
I feel that questions around access are a very structural, structural one. It takes you back to the whole kernel of the conversation in the first instance. The breakdown, the collapse of the society we live in. In fact, the factors that even necessitated our acting in the first instance, speak to that collapse. So one, to expect it to be an isolated one, of course, it has affected all the distributive mechanisms for tools, books, and other literacy materials in the past. The school system, even if you talk about getting your books on the curriculum, you meet a whole, force field of corruption and bias, if you see what goes on with publishers in collaboration with the government to get good books on the reading list of schools, you marvel. And then when you think about, the social safety, the social systems we design, but I always like to end, I prefer to choose an optimistic note, so to feel empowered, because the complexities of the challenges in Nigeria easily leave an individual feeling very disempowered, and therefore you opt for the place of passivity, or you just turn the other cheek, you turn away, you numb yourself. I think that, you embrace your solutions in bite sizes. I think that the philosophy of doing what you can from where you are with what you have is a good philosophy. It's a good starting point, while at the same time having a proper, appreciation for the dynamics of your surrounding environment. It would be a failure of the whole writing process and the whole vision if the books didn't get into the hands of the vast majority of children, right? So that must be on the mind of the writer. I think that it's a partnership with every well-meaning individual. I don't see it as the author's sole burden. I see it as every person who sees works like this of import in the society today must build the alternative infrastructure for it to reach the children. For instance, I'll give you an example. One of my intentions, publishing today is very expensive. And that naturally impacts on the cost of the books, right? So I said to myself, one of the approaches, apart from doing a book launch where you can have a launch price, one of the goals is that all the proceeds of my books, for instance, go to libraries. We have an initiative called Community-Based Smart Libraries, small libraries. We plant them in small, under-resourced neighborhoods and communities, just making sure that there's a distributive space, a space that children can walk into. Because if you think about what it takes to set up libraries, it's not even in the agenda of the government. When you look at the new Minister Alausa's agenda for education, libraries don't feature. Yet libraries must complement schooling for real learning outcomes, right? And the children of the privileged set have access to books, have access to the cultures that surround reading. But the other children, because nobody read to them, not when they were fetus in the wombs, not when they are out in the world, reading is a skill, and any skill must be developed. It doesn't fall on us, right? So we need to create these alternative spaces that help support these children to read, to enjoy it, to grow in the scale of it. So that's some of these ideas, as ordinary as they seem, are revolutionary, but because of the scale, they're so small, so we don't see the power. So that for me is what the first 2 million that came out of my books has already started supporting my LA library. The next proceeds will go to the, Total Garden, the Burial Library, So these are some of the infrastructure, but it doesn't, the individual alone cannot do it. It's the collective. And if we see that the political or the formal institutions have broken down, then the society must contemplate what is its role. How do we step in? Because we are all trying to build alternative systems until we get the politics right again. It will take a long time for the gestation period for all the reforms in terms of the political institutions to manifest, right? But in the meantime, we must not abdicate the role of the thinkers, because if we fall to the scenario where we're only thinking of the stomach infrastructure, surviving, we are worse off. We are worse off. So that's why, books like this must still keep coming out, however limited, and writers must still keep thinking. You don't use the traditional systems of distribution. That's why I decided I wasn't going to just publish traditionally and distribute traditionally. It will never reach the hands of the children. But through well thought out creative approaches, so your creativity does not end in the writing. It ends also with you thinking about how does it get to the hands of these children. And to the point that you raised, Dr. Ademola, even the format, it's not sufficient for this to be in text alone. If we identify that a whole culture has raised children who cannot read text, then you must give them other digestible formats. So my talks are, I'm currently in New York, and I'm talking with partners here about how do we develop multimedia versions of the role model series for African children, so that since they are already on TikTok and they're already on some of these spaces for content consumption, how do I use YouTube, for instance, to make it available in audio, video for these children to be able to digest? So these are things we must be, the challenge is that they're capital intensive, but the vision must be there. It is the vision. I noticed when an individual prioritizes a vision, everything around you aligns in partnership with your vision, if there's real conviction and consistency behind it. So I always prefer to just operate from a mission-oriented stance and then just see how things fall in line. But this is my own approach to distribution. All of these, basically non-profit-led strategies, community-led strategies, partnership-led strategies, and already we're at least over 300 children have gotten these books. I'm hoping that, we'll complete the first set of books published and go to reprint. To my closing remarks, I think that, one of the things I want to stress is that as the proverbial adage always says, for as long as the lion does not tell its own story, then the hunt will forever glorify the hunter. It's to the example, even to the, to the point you brought up about, an American slanted tale of capturing Osama is going to always present America in great fashion. And that's what we found, that one of the greatest storytellers of the 20th and 21st centuries has been the United States. And so to the extent that they told their stories so well, they programmed the rest of us to idolize them, to see them without their clay feet. But increasingly with social media, that's the beauty of social media, all that the power was redistributed, and more people then could to counteract, could confront, could challenge a lot of the stories that they told us and we just believed. We're all creatures of programming, and it's interesting how the media of the 20th century and 21st century, apart from the privileged academics who had access to libraries, who could go and interrogate, the rest of us, it's like almost the times when only a few people had the Holy Bible, and before the Martin Luther's came and democratized access. It's the same thing. We were all at the mercy of what was told to us. It's only recently we're all redigesting the Libya crisis and the end of Gaddafi. We're all seeing in a new light all the things that was once told to us. So this is a call for us to tell our stories to our children, because our children have assimilated self-hatred. Our children have assimilated till today. The African child romanticizes the West and just believes that anything coming out of the soil of Nigeria is just bad. It affects trade, it affects commerce, it affects everything, you name it. It affects it. It affects the potential for GDP earning capacity. It affects migration. It affects everything. It affects our governance. It affects our foreign policy. It affects everything. So we must go back to the starting point. We must learn, to accept that, flawed as we are, because there's no perfect society. Flawed as we are, that must be the beginning point of our social and our advancement. So I think that anybody who is in the business of telling stories today, is very well poised for the new world because all the signposts of the previous world are collapsing. We are now moving into an unfamiliar world with all the familiar signposts ending. And the world, the contours are still shaping. We don't know where to take us. But if we see those who are the vanguards of culture, who are in the spaces called media, they are mind crafters. They are the ones now who have the ability to craft minds, to mold minds. The power of the media is that it has the ability to mold human minds and galvanize human action. You have the ability to tell people this is the right information, even if it is the wrong information, and they believe you and they act with it. So we now acting with integrity, knowing what is at least driven by a higher, more pure, more elevated cause, which is our own self-enlightenment, our own true liberalization of ourselves, have that responsibility to represent ourselves to our own children, even to ourselves. We too, we must learn to love ourselves again because we are guilty in many ways of, writing off Africa and Nigeria. We do have complex challenges, but everything is an idea. Anything that is good and admirable in the world was birthed out of an idea. So it is ideas that will take us out of these complexities. It is ideas that will galvanize us around good values that will again shape us into a strong civilization. Stories carry ideas. So we must promote storytellers in whatever shape and form, good, positive-driven storytellers.
Oh, thank you so much. That was extensive and detailed and deep. I've just been jotting and jotting and jotting and jotting everywhere. I would like to yield my mic now to Opeyemi. Are you there for the vote of thanks so that we can close it for tonight? Opeyemi, can we have you now? Okay, while I'm waiting on her, I would like to reinstate for any of us on this call who is not a member of the GRC. Please, we would love to have you on the GRC. We organize events like this where we have intergenerational and interdisciplinary approaches to contemporary matters, impactful discussions like this. We have over 500 active, versatile individuals, professors, doctors, undergraduates, and people from different fields whom you can relate with, which you can relate with and get to know and get to meet and get to collaborate with, ask questions, have discussions, and make policy shifting decisions and conversations. So please, I would be dropping, I don't know if Dr. Toby, I think we can help me drop the link in the chat box now. That would be very appreciated. Okay, Opeyemi, do I have? Thank you so much, sir. So we have the link for you to join. Just um, a quick registration, and you'll be done. I'm not sure Opeyemi is available, so I would like to thank everyone for joining today's meeting, the insightful discussions. It is always a privilege having you around. Titi Kush, Edemosai, Prof. Ademola, Wisdom, Ebai, everyone on this call. Yeah, we know how busy you are. We know the value of your time. And every time you say yes to our call, we are grateful because you recognize the impact of what we do here as well. And yes, we look forward to more collaborations with you in any way we can help to support, to push the course of the things you're doing. We are definitely available to do so, willing and to see how to push them to the right quarters. And thank you and thank you and thank you once again. Dr. Tobizan, do you want to add anything before we close up?
No, that'll be all. Thank you so much, everyone. See you around.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Before we go, can we just take oh, she has gone. Although I think I took one earlier. And just our cameras and just take pictures. I'm not on my PC though. I didn't join with my PC. We could just take pictures Let me switch and try to do that. I forgot the split of the second. Okay. All right. I'd like to take a selfie. So if you can show your face, your beautiful faces, and we'll just take the picture now. Yeah. Uh-oh. Thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful night from here in Nigeria, afternoon, and whatever part of the world you are receiving this call from. Thank you so much.